On today's show, we start our Houston Rockets NBA Draft Profile Series, beginning with UConn's Donovan Clingan. We're going to get into his strengths, his weaknesses, NBA player comps, projected draft range, his Rockets fit, and so much more. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, where we want your thoughts on Donovan Clingan as a prospect for the Houston Rockets with the 3rd overall pick. Let us know how you feel about Clingan in the YouTube comments. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, NBA draft enthusiast, and diehard Houston Rockets fan, Madison Moore. You can track down on Twitter at MadmanLeaks. Here as we begin our Houston Rockets NBA draft profile breakdown episodes. I know Madison is hyped for this. He waits all year for this segment of Locked On Rockets for him to shine brightest with his NBA draft enthusiasm. I get to introduce you as an NBA draft enthusiast every time, and now this is your time to shine, Madison. We're going to be leaning on you heavily during this 5-6 week pre-draft process as we tackle all of these different prospects that the Rockets should or could potentially have their eyes on. And we're starting our draft profile series here at Locked On Rockets with none other than UConn's Donovan Clingan. We're going to get into so much on today's episode. We're going to get into, obviously, just kind of who he is as a player, his physicals, his strengths, his weaknesses. We're going to get into a little bit of some of the comps that we have for him, you know, players that he could become, either kind of his low-end outcome, mid-tier outcomes, and then like the ultimate, you know, the ideal scenario, his high-end outcomes as a player, as well as his overall fit, both just as a player himself, and then obviously his fit on this specific Houston Rockets team. We've got a lot to get into today. Madison, let's start with this. If you're pitching Donovan Clingan to somebody who's never seen him before, who's never even seen a photo of this guy, how would you pitch Donovan Clingan?
Yeah, man. Honestly, just a massive defensive drop big. And I think that is Donovan Clingan's biggest selling point. We know he's a traditional big in the sense that he's kind of a blast from the past, a guy with just tremendous measurements, but ultimately where he's going to make his bread and butter at the league is as a drop big, covering the assignments, cleaning up the glass, as well as protecting the paint. This guy's absolutely massive, takes up so much space in the paint, and he's also an excellent screener and is going to be a huge target in the pick and roll. And so this guy has defensive player of the year potential. That is how good and how advanced his processing is on the defensive end. And like I said, he doesn't play as much out on the perimeter as a switch big, but as a drop big, you won't find one better.
You mentioned the measurables there. This dude is an absolute behemoth of a human being. He's measuring in at just under 7'2" without shoes. So when he makes it to the NBA and they start, messing with all the measurements and everything, and you get to actually wear your sneakers during the measurements, he'll clock in at well over 7'3", a wingspan of 7'7", and then a standing reach 9 feet 7 inches. Clocks in at 282 pounds currently. This dude is every bit, you talked about it right already, is just, the old school traditional lumbering big man, somebody that you could go airdrop into like the mid 2000s or 90s or whatever, and he would be right at home in that era of the NBA. A bit of a dying breed in today's NBA, but definitely, there are still some big-bodied centers in today's league that you would want to have a big man to be able to throw out there, guys to body like Jokic, Embiid, a couple of the guys to keep in mind when you're thinking of constructing a roster and how you would be able to counter some of those guys at the highest level. Now, when we start looking at, I'll let you steer the bus here for a second, Madison. Do you want to tackle his weaknesses first, or do you want to talk about his strengths first? Do we want to sell this guy, or do we want to lowball him and then get to the good stuff later?
Well, I think we should talk about his strengths. I think we should explain to people why Donovan Clingan is so highly regarded in this draft. And I think, like I said, it starts with the drop defense. I think this guy's one of the most elite drop big prospects we've seen. And like you said, he has a 9'7" reach, standing reach. Just for some context for the viewers, Zach Edey, most people know who follow college basketball know Zach Edey. He was 7'4" without shoes, had a 7'11" wingspan, and had a 9'7" standing reach. Why is that important? Because Donovan Clingan, right, who is also massive, has a 9'7" standing reach as well. So when that guy puts up and goes with his principles of verticality, he is just every bit as big as a 7'4" Zach Edey. So that just goes to show how much sheer space this guy is going to take up. And even though this guy is so big, 282 pounds, his ability to hedge on drop coverage and then recover back and make plays at the rim, whether it be playing the cat and mouse between the guard and the whoever's in the dunker spot, this guy is excellent at that. And it's kind of amazing how athletic he looks and how fast he moves on the defensive end. And when we get into the weaknesses, I'll talk about how that athleticism doesn't really pop offensively, but defensively, this guy's just ahead of the curve. He's reading the game. He understands where he needs to be, and he's there on time. He doesn't make mistakes in this sense. Now, he's not the type of guy, like you said, he is a very big guy. You don't want to switch with him, and you don't want to leave him on the island with guys like Luka Doncic or whatnot, but he can come out and hedge hard. He can come out and hold his own on the perimeter when it comes out to a closeout because of his length and his recoverability. This guy's foot speed and recovering is really the most impressive thing I've seen about him. A guy this big should not be able to recover as well as he does, but I think it just goes to show that 9'7" standing reach and 7'7" wingspan is the ultimate equalizer when it comes to him moving in space. So that is where I kind of want to start with his strengths, because that is his biggest strength. But I also like to talk about his offensive strengths as well. Well, offensive. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a couple things, because you brought up this point about his recoverability, right? And I think that bleeds into something that I noticed is his awareness. He's actually pretty adept at being in the right spots, both offensively and defensively, right? Whether it means he's moving out of the way and clearing a lane for his guard to be able to drive to the rim, or just being in the right spot for a dump off pass, right? Good hands, can catch, doesn't bobble a lot of passes. And then defensively, right? The recoverability, understanding, hey, yeah, I might get beat on this drive, right? If I'm, guarding a quicker player or whatever, they get past me, or if I might rotate over from the weak side, whatever. It's the timing and the awareness that he has of how to get to his spots to be that impact player defensively. And then this is kind of goes into that awareness thing is, a guy who's as big as he is could very easily get lazy on the glass at times. And he doesn't. He does a good job boxing out, does his work early, right? Puts a body on guys, or sometimes even a couple of guys, because sometimes it takes 2 or 3 guys to try and keep him off the glass. So he does his work early, right? Looking for those positions to get low, to use his leverage. Not that he, needs a ton of leverage because he's so massive, but doing that early work is what makes him such a great rebounder as well.
Yes, and just to add to that rebound, like you said, he does his early work, but this guy has strong, sure hands. Like there's prospects like Khalil Ware. When you see him rebound in the crowd, he's often tipping the ball. He's not strong enough to hold his position and just grab that and secure it.
Yeah.
Yes. No, Clingan goes up with 2 hands and secures the board. Nobody's getting it. It's the type of stuff that you like this. It's a toughness that comes with rebounding, where this is mine and nobody else can touch it. Clingan has
that's good fundamental rebounding,
yes,
right? Old school big man rebounding.
That's what I'm saying, man. And that's the type of toughness that you want on your team. The type of backline. This guy is the ultimate backline guy you will want on your team with that toughness. And I think he has enough tools to play in this modern NBA. I know we talk about him as a blast from the past, but he has enough tools to play in the modern NBA. And just to shift gears a little bit about him offensively. Now, he's not the most polished guy with creation, right? But he's a huge target. And like you said, He moves so well and always in position. He moves in space well on rolls as well. And he's a huge target that will always kind of be there for a drop off or in the dunker spot or as a roll man. And he's a decent finisher at the rim.
And he's a surprisingly good passer too. That's the other thing is, he's a good, good screen setter, right? Big body, able to create separation for his guards or for who the primary ball handler is. And then even just passing, whether it's DHOs or just kind of operating out of the short roll, like he's a guy that you think there have been some flashes there, some glimpses where you can imagine that he's not just going to be he's not going to at any point be like an offensive liability where like, oh God, he caught the ball. What's he going to do with it? No, he makes good quality reads. He's able to find the open man. It's simple stuff, but it goes a long way when you're talking about, kind of the entirety of somebody's offensive repertoire. Now, we're going to get into some of the downsides here in just a moment, some of the, not so great stuff about him, the weaknesses, if you will, as well as we're going to get into our NBA player comps, as well as his overall fit or potential fit with this Houston Rockets team. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. And all you have to do is wager $5. Right now you can take a look at the favorite to go number one overall in this year's 2024 NBA draft, Alex Sarr, minus 300 to be the number one overall pick. Right behind him, Zachary Richeche at plus 450, Donovan Clingan plus 1,100 to go number one overall in this year's draft. For all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot or NBA draft shot count. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, continuing our conversation about UConn's Donovan Clingan here, one of the prospects the Rockets should be and likely will be taking a look at with the number 3 overall pick in this year's NBA draft. Let's get to some of the downsides here with Clingan, because there's a lot of good stuff to say about him. And one of the biggest drawbacks here is, in every sense of the word of being an old-fashioned big man, the dude cannot shoot the ball. He just can't shoot right now. The numbers back that up. He shot 51.7% as a freshman from the free throw line, and then only about 57.5% his sophomore year. So not great numbers there. Usually we can look at free throw shooting and try and extrapolate and see, okay, well, if they are a decent free throw shooter, are the mechanics okay? Can that translate to being a decent shooter in the NBA at some point down the line? It's tough with Clingan because, especially at the combine, right, he's trying to sell himself as like a 3-point shooter, maybe not right out of the gate, but somewhere down the line. At least right now, in the immediate here and now, the shooting is not a skill that he's going to be able to rely on, day one of his rookie season. It's going to be something he's going to have to work on for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I think the only, real good thing about the shooting is I think the mechanics and the form is good. He shot it a bit in high school, so there is some long down the line projection, but you're not going to draft this guy today because of his shooting. You kind of just want to add that into the equation of his upside. But I think I'm a little bit more concerned about another weakness of Clingan's. And for me, it is Donovan Clingan can get sped up when the paint is packed. And when he gets sped up when the paint is packed, he's not a great finisher. That's when he loses the touch on that finishing, which I think his touch is actually okay. But when he gets sped up, when he shows 3 or 4 guys, defenders in the paint, and he's that big target and guys are in his face, he tries to get the ball up on the rim too fast, and he'll often leave layups short. And that's something that came up in his film over and over and over again. And it's a worry of mine. But I do think, that is some of the things that he can work on with coaching staffs, because I do think he has touch and he's flashed some good moves and good touch around the basket. Now, I do think for a guy that size, he got blocked entirely too many times. And whether that be by his primary post defender on him making a move, or as a weak side guard or help defender coming and blocking his shot. I mean, that comes with your awareness. And for a guy from this size, that's just not what you want to see. So those are some areas I think Clingan has to work on in order so he can get some good touch on the rim and actually just be a bit more patient when he gets the ball down low. Now, I do think he has upside in that area, so it's not an end-all, be-all, but if the Rockets were to draft a guy like this, I think fans might be a little surprised at him leaving a couple layups short on the rim.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where he's going to have a career as an NBA player regardless of how well his offensive game develops, because you can always use a guy that's that big, that adept defensively, a drop big, right? Even if he only carves out an NBA career as like a 10-minute a night per guy, very situationally, used, whatever, kind of like a Boban type almost, but like a defensive version of Boban, then he'll still have an NBA career. So the offensive developments can be kind of the icing on top, or the cherry on top of a sundae, if you will. I will say one other thing that stood out to me is I was a little bit off put by how frequently he catches the ball up top and then brings it down to his chest. Now, I don't necessarily know if it matters, because his chest is still a lot bigger, and like he's still massive, right? So maybe it's not as bad as like, a 6'8" guy rebounding the ball and bringing it down to his chest, and suddenly it's in swiping range of everybody and everybody's trying to get their hands on the ball. Maybe it's a little bit different when you're 7'3" and he's got the strong arms, two good hands, but it just kind of, it's like one of those things that fundamentally, right, you're not, don't bring the ball down, right? If you're going to rebound it, keep it high, especially on offensive putbacks, right? Don't bring it down and put it down to your chest and then go back up with it. Just all in one motion, catch it, put it back up on the rim. So that was just one other small thing that kind of stood out to me, something that I hope he's able to improve on with his game. Now, Madison, this draft is kind of helter-skelter, because I've seen mocks where Clingan is going, I don't think I've seen any mocks with him going number 1 to Atlanta, but I've seen mocks with him as high as number 2 to the Wizards, and I've seen him mocked all the way down as like 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, it's kind of crazy the range. He might have one of the most volatile, or like high variance kind of ranges of any of the prospects that we're going to talk about here at the top of the draft.
Yeah, man. I have the beholder draft. So a lot of these prospects can go in like a 10 spot range. And I think for Clingan, though, I think he's comfortably won't pass Memphis, but I expect Clingan to be picked in the top 5 of this draft, just because I think he has an incredibly high floor as a defensive big, as a DPOY type player. And that gives him like you said, a very solid floor. And then if he can add on to the offensive game, which there is some promise, that's when you get to see the real upside, and his higher end comps get to come in if he adds that offensive part of the game and some of the weaknesses we were talking about, if he shores those things up.
Okay, so let's get into some of the player comps that we have here. Now, we've talked about Clingan a little bit previously on this show, so this might be a rehash of some of these comps for people. If you've heard that previous episode where we talked about the Rockets' ability to potentially jump up in this year's NBA draft, but we're going to revisit this because we're going to follow the structure, the formula for our draft profiles here. So, Madison, walk us through. You've got the low end, the mid tier, and the high end player comps for Clingan. Give us a couple comps in each category and kind of walk us through the thought process here.
Yeah, so I know what we've kind of talked about Clingan's low, median, and high-end comps, so a lot of these will sound familiar if you listen to the previous episodes, but I'll just go through them real quick. Eric Dampier and Brendan Haywood, blast from the past with Dallas Mavericks. That's these big body centers that kind of just take up space. That's what their job is, to muddy up the paint and, really make things hard for other guys, but really no skill involved. And I really think that's, we're not going to see that from Clingan. I think more of the higher of the low end is Robin Lopez, just this serviceable backup center who can play some defense, spot up minutes, and even play some starter level minutes if you have a injury. All right,
hey man, but I just want to highlight really quick. I would pay good money to watch Donovan Clingan fight mascots. I'm just going to put that out there. So if he can at least live up to that part of the Rolo legend, then we're good.
Yeah, no, that would be hilarious. That's actually something you should probably do, man. These big guys, they're so funny. But yeah, but just moving on to the median outcomes, I think Omer Asik is a really good outcome for him. I think they have similar body type, even though Clingan's a lot bigger than Omer. They kind of are the similar type bigs who really get it done with positioning and length.
The OG Rockets Turkish big man.
Yeah, Omer, man. If anybody remember the the James Harden to Omer Asik connection, man, that was a sight to watch, man. But just that excellent screening, you can definitely expect it from them, and always being in position, making it tough on offensive players. I also like to add in Andrew Bynum. Like you were saying, If Clingan actually keeps the ball up high, like that was Andrew Bynum's like bread and butter, is that he could get a rebound off the board with those very strong hands and put it right back in the rim. I think that is an outcome for Clingan. And that's a way that, let's say the jump shot never comes around. Let's say he's not the offensive facilitator that we think his upside can be, but he just improves his finishing around the rim at a real level and is able to just be a force on the boards and putbacks. I think Andrew Bynum is a way he can really affect the game, and he's going to be a big body like that. As well as Steven Adams, just reliable, defensive, tough, big, able to do a lot of different things, including sneakily as a passer out of the high post. And that's one of the sneaky good things about his upside, is that he has the potential to be a hub. And I think Steven Adams has a lot of those characteristics. All right. So finally, let's get into the high end outcomes. Like I said, I thought Brad Miller would be an excellent cop if that jump shot ever comes around. Of course, the passing and the toughness and the rebounding, that's all screams Brad Miller, but even bigger.
I was going to say even bigger, because Brad Miller clocked in at about like 6'11", maybe on a good day. Like he might have started shrinking near the end of his NBA career. But I mean, if you tell me you can give me a 7'3" Brad Miller with the passing and the shooting and then better defense, my God, that's an all NBA caliber player right there.
Right. I mean, that's what I think. If that offense really develops in a real way, like if he maximizes his offense, that's kind of what you'd see in Brad Miller type player. But also Brook Lopez, that's if the shot comes around, and an excellent drop big. I had it as a median outcome, but you kind of reminded me, like, Brook Lopez is just an excellent player that should be kind of upgraded to a high end. And finally, a lot of people know this is my favorite comp for him. I really think this is the top of his, is Marc Gasol. It's the marriage of the passing, the screening, the defensive versatility. Well, not versatility, but the defensive prowess, the strength, and the way Marc Gasol wins defensively with positioning and intelligence. I think that screams Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, not the most athletic guy, big, slow dude, but just occupied space, understood where to be, how to read, anticipation, all of that, right? All the kind of intangibles that go into defense, especially when you're a guy that big and occupying so much space.
Yeah, and also Marc Gasol did not come in this league as a lottery pick. He was a guy that took a long time for him to develop, develop that jump shot, maybe in like 6th or 7th year in the league. It just took him. He just gradually got better, and I think that could be a real blueprint for Clingan getting better. And if teams really want to pick him inside the top 3, that is the type of upside they'll be projecting for Clingan.
Coming up, we're going to get into the fit question here. How would Donovan Clingan look in the NBA, as well as just on the Houston Rockets, right? How would he mesh along some of these current Rockets core members? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more players' stats and watch the winnings roll in. It really is so simple to play. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of different players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 DFS app on the market. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the NBA postseason. So if you've been thinking about getting into daily fantasy sports, give Prize Picks a chance. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go grab the Prize Picks app and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Madison. So now we get into, I think this is my favorite part of these profiles, is just trying to imagine how this player fits into not only the NBA landscape, but specifically how would they fit with this Houston Rockets team, right? What is the need that this player is addressing here? And I do think that when we look at this Rockets roster, there's nobody on the team who provides what Donovan Clingan would provide from, an archetype standpoint, his on-court impact, the way that he would kind of change the fabric of the team defensively, especially, with his presence on the floor. I think the issue here that a lot of people have taken exception to the idea of drafting Donovan Clingan #3 overall is, one, it's really hard to, if you were to change the elevator pitch earlier and say, hey, Houston Rockets, you got the number 3 overall pick. You're going to draft a backup center. Like, that's not very sexy, right? That's not the way to sell Donovan Clingan to a Rockets fan. I think the way to sell Donovan Clingan to Rockets fans is to say you're getting kind of the antithesis to Alperen Sengun, right? Sengun is an absolute phenom. He's an offensive wonderkin. He's been, played out of his mind, borderline all-star this past season. But Clingan gives you kind of I guess the opposite skill set, right? He gives you a defensive big, a lot more size, and I think that's almost a perfect way to complement Alperen Sengun. Now, you could say, drafting Clingan as a backup to the guy who's already your best player might be, a bad, a mismanagement of assets, if you will. I'm not so much in that camp, but I can see kind of arguments from both sides when we talk about his fit and what he would look like on this Rockets roster.
Yeah, I think I think we shouldn't be so short-sighted in our views. If we're drafting players to be who they are today, then I think that's the wrong way to think about NBA prospects. This is about development. And if you want these guys to get on the floor together, you develop them together. And like Rafael Stone, smart players can play together. I think both of them are incredibly smart. They're just going to have to work on their weaknesses so they can complement each other on the floor. And I do think that like big to big lineups are coming back in this league. We just watched Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns make it to the conference finals against the MVP Jokic. We need different types of bigs in this lineup.
Can I highlight
that?
This point you're making here, I think, is fantastic. I think one of the reasons that the Wolves outperformed and were able to ultimately outlast and beat the Nuggets in that series is having Towns, Gobert, and Naz Reid, a three-headed monster of bigs to throw at Jokic is what eventually wore him down in that series. You watched him in that Game 7. He played 47 minutes. He was gassed. He had nothing left in the tank. He started settling for 3 after 3 after 3 as the Wolves were going on their run. And at one point, he was, 0-7, 0-8, whatever it was from downtown. Like, I do think it's important to have depth across the board. And when you look at the Rockets, even if we're mapping this out 2, 3, 4 years from now, let's say Sengun's still the Rockets' best player a few years from now, right? They continue to build around him. He keeps getting better. He's one of the best players in the NBA, whatever. It's going to be a great thing to have a backup that can spell Sengun to where there's not either A, massive drop-off when he goes to the bench, or B, you can change the look of a game. And maybe Sengun is, he's your offensive hub. He's getting 30, 35 minutes a night. But being able to throw Clingan out there and just lock things down for 10, 15 minutes a night, even if he's backing up your best player. And to your point about them being able to play together, I think there's absolutely a world where if these two guys hit some of their top end outcomes, right? If Sengun can work on the shooting, get that 3-point shot to a respectable level, if Clingan can do the same, then I don't see why they couldn't coexist offensively. Does it change things? Do you have to scheme a little bit differently on the defensive side of the ball with those two guys on the floor together? Absolutely. Is it impossible? Definitely not.
Yeah, and Ime Udoka's had experience with 2 big lineups with Al Horford and Robert Williams. There is upside and ways that this can work. I think Clingan can play as the primary guy in a drop scheme or as the roamer because that is his anticipation skills are just that good. So if you want to hedge hard,
it's what we saw Rudy Gobert doing, right? He was guarding Aaron Gordon, and he was the free safety roamer blowing things up for the T-Wolves.
And I just want to remind people, like, the Warriors are no more. The Warriors were the antithesis of this type of old school basketball. And I think now we're starting to see a resurgence of the big men, of the stability of defense. And with the league going back to more toughness and drawing back on the foul calls, I think you're going to need a variety of ways to play. We know that's what you need to win a championship. You have to play in several different ways. And I think it'll be good to add a starter level defensive big to this team and let the dominoes fall where they may. If he's just a backup big that gives us 20, 25 minutes, and God forbid we have an injury like we had with Sengun at the end of the season, we have a starter level big who can do a lot of the dribble handoff, the playmaking out of the high post, and as a roller that can still continue to run this offense, supplement that offense when Sengun is out. And of course, we still have the upside of them maybe playing together. So I don't think we should close our minds off to the possibility of that. And like I said, for this core 6, if you just look at our core 6, we do not have a player of this archetype in the core 6. And so I think if we're going to add a guy to this core 6 for the core 7, we should add a different layer or archetype to continue to build this as a team.
And I think this is worth noting for any rookie that this version of this Rockets team brings in. It's not like previous years. They're not going to be logging a ton of minutes right out of the gate, if any minutes. I think regardless of who the Rockets take with the 3rd overall pick, if they draft somebody there, this player is not going to play right out of the gate. They're going to slow play the development. It's going to be somebody who they probably spend a lot of time at the G League before getting up to speed and then being brought on at the NBA level. And even then, like if you're talking about drafting Clingan, well, guess what? You got to fight through minutes for Sengun, and then you've already got Steven Adams, who's probably projected to be in the Rockets, top 9, 10-man rotation next season. You've also got to include any spot minutes that Jeff Green might get at the 5 if the Rockets bring him back, which, everything that I'm led to believe is they want to bring Jeff Green back. Jabari Smith Jr. getting small ball 5 minutes. Hell, maybe even some Tari Eason minutes the 5. Who knows, right? Ime's done, all sorts of crazy things with his lineups this past season. But having that player to throw in there and having that player to be able to learn from guys like Steven Adams, Jock, Landale, if he's still part of the team next season, and kind of get up to speed, because let's face it, Steven Adams is in the back half of his career. He's not going to be around forever. It's great that the Rockets picked him up, but he's on a 1-year deal. He might decide to leave Houston after this next season. He might go somewhere else. Having Donovan Clingan as like a long-term 4-year under contract, either backup big or at least starter level replacement big, like you said, somebody who obviously plays a very different style of basketball than Alperen Sengun, but at least projects to be, a huge defensive presence and can probably be an NBA level starter somewhere down the line. Maybe not right out of the gate, but down the line. I think that's a great, I don't want to call it an insurance policy to have, but it's just great depth for a team that I think one of the other lessons that we can learn from this year's NBA postseason is depth matters. Like, you can have the best, like, top 5, top 6 guys, but it doesn't matter if when you go to your bench and the other team goes to their bench blows yours out of the water. Like, you need depth. I think we're getting away from, and the Suns kind of showed this, and, the Warriors have kind of shown this a little bit. We're getting away from the idea of, like, you need to have, like, the big 3, right? The big 3 era in the NBA is kind of dying, and it feels like teams are now gravitating more towards, you have like your 2 star players, and then you have the right amount of complementary role players and supporting cast around those guys, and that includes having depth, having a deep bench, and having, I think at the end of the day, being able to throw different looks out there. And that's the thing with Clingan, is I think he gives the Rockets something that they don't have, a completely different identity, a completely different look when he would be on the floor versus any of the other bigs on this Rockets roster.
Yeah, man. And just finally, I know we talked a lot about the fit with Sengun, but let's just talk about the fit with the already budding defensive wings that we have on this top team. Can you imagine, lineups where we can put Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Amon Thompson out there with Donovan Clingan, the type of defense that we would be employing on guys, the type of punishment that we could be putting on guys with those electric wing defenders, point of attack defenders, mirror them every way. And then we have that big presence in the back and just absolutely elite on time all the time as a help defender. I think that this is the type of stuff that catapults you into a number 1 defense. And that is the type of upside you get by bringing such an elite defensive presence to this team. As you guys know, Minnesota Timberwolves finished as the number 1 defense this year. They employed a 2-big lineup, right? And they had an elite drop big covering their backside. I think that should not, we should not turn our heads up. They just beat the defending champions. They just wore Nikola Jokic, the MVP, down. This is not dead. These guys have tremendous value, and we shouldn't just look away because we think the NBA is trending in one direction or not.
We're going to revisit this pod when down the line Donovan Clingan hits a turnaround jumper over the reigning MVP in the semifinals of the playoffs for the Rockets. It's going to happen. No, I kid. All right, Madison, that's going to wrap up our Donovan Clingan draft profile. We want your thoughts, though, on Donovan Clingan in the YouTube comments. How would you feel if the Rockets took him 3rd overall? How do you feel about his strengths, his weaknesses? What are your own observations of Clingan? How do you think he would fit on this Houston Rockets team? Let us know in those comments. But Madison, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @MadmanLeaks. Come talk Rockets basketball and NBA draft.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, a 5-star review helps us out a ton. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.